set? Okay, we will open December 11th City Council work session. First thing I need is approval of the agenda.
So moved?
Second?
All in favor?
Yes.
Okay, tonight we're going to have, we're talking about the major big ticket items. We introduced this on Monday. We had a presentation, Bruce put together a presentation. He is going to do a brief overview of the presentation again for those of you who have not seen it, the Monday night presentation. And then we will open the floor for public discussion. This is kind of a hearing and kind of a give and take, so I'll ask Bruce to start.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Somebody that I worked for once said, I will be brief, concise, and to the point. It's like, you already missed that one. So I'm going to try to do the same. I'll skip some slides where I can. First thing we talk about is the fact that every state has some natural disaster potential. Midwest, tornadoes and flooding. North, frigid and blustery winters. California, earthquakes and wildfires. Florida has hurricanes and mosquitoes. The thing that all those folks have in common, that when they're dealing with issues, is that the answer is to bring in the cavalry. So if, like when you look at what was going on with the California fires, you have the, it wasn't just California, it wasn't just that locality taking care of that. There were firefighters coming in from Oregon, Idaho, other places. And so that's kind of the answer. And then like in Florida, our experience was if there was a hurricane on the East Coast, the West Coast was ready to move over as soon as it had passed. We are not so lucky, and I'll get to that in just a second. But we have the potential for earthquakes of all sizes and distances. We have local and distant tsunamis. The local versus distant is that the local tsunami would be triggered by a local earthquake, and we would have less time in order to respond, and generally they will be a larger or deeper tsunami than what we would have if it was a distant. Oregon is doing a lot to try to get ready for these things, but if you think about it, like they're still in the planning and learning stages now, but it makes sense that they're probably going to give a priority to the population centers, and they're going to make a priority to the places they can get to first, and we don't qualify in either one of those cases. There is discussion about getting supplies to the coast, and they've gone so far as to say that we will try to use Redmond Airport as a place to from which to operate, but there's really no plan to get anything from Redmond to here. And some basic things that you would hope to have in place, like utility restoration and debris removal, we really don't have those handled yet. And so, and then also when we're talking about being on our own, if there's a bridge or a tunnel failure to the south, or the Youngs Bay Bridge, if there's a failure there, we will be even more isolated because State Road 26, I guess it's State Road, but 26, it is not considered a priority road to be restored. So if people will be able to come in from the Astoria side, they'd be able to come from south of here. I think it's in on 30 or whatever. Somebody told me the other night, and I don't recall them. But once they will not be able to get to us, and 26, nobody's going to be working on it. So hopefully, we've got everything still operational, but those are issues that we have to say, okay, we are going to be on our own. And for those reasons, I'm saying that because we're going to be on our own more than the rest of the state, that we need to be in a position to do the best we can to take care of ourselves. We're going to be on our own longer. Actually, I should have, right here it says, what are some of the city's deficiencies in terms of emergency management? I'm trying to talk too fast. That probably should say emergency response, because that's what we're talking about. In terms of water, it's the most important thing for survival after an event. We can survive for 3 days without water, not a whole lot more. And we did a study recently. There was a master plan for water and wastewater. And when we went through that, it was determined that parts of our the water supply system is vulnerable to earthquakes. And the infrastructure that is in place to move the water down to the city where it starts to get distributed, that was in place or installed. The materials were pre-seismic events. So that's where the vulnerability comes from. We do have an engineering company that's going to be taking a look at the each component of the system, and I'll go through those now. Can you turn the light out, Rusty? Kind of hard to see this slide. I've always seen, any map I've ever seen, the water, I'm sorry, got the wrong one. The springs are always up at the top. They're down at the bottom here, so it's a little harder. So anyway, we have springs here, and that's where the water comes from. So you've got the connection components there. Then you have a line that runs down to the treatment plant where the water is treated. And then from there, it goes down to a location in the vicinity of the RV park. And then it comes back up to a tank. And the tank is what determines the pressure, the depth, the height of the water in the tank determines the pressure in the water throughout the system. And then it goes back out to a location kind of by 101 and Sunset. And that's where it then goes into the system and gets distributed north and south. The point here is that if any one of these components fails all the way through this, we don't have a water supply. And so that's why that particular subject is raised on everybody's radar, because talk about the water goals after a seismic event. We have a goal to have potable water somewhere, and that somewhere might be down by the RV park, down by the public works yard, something like that, because it's a straight shot down, and then we don't have to factor in any kind of a distribution system. But we will have, hopefully everybody will have water in their supplies. We will have is the best that we can do as far as what we would have at the our sites, the cache sites. But if we're going to have a lot of people, if everybody's home, all 1,706 people or whatever it is, we're going to need water. We'll probably have to supplement that. And so that's why we're saying we need to have water within 3 days. And that is actually a top priority for Public Works. There's going to be a lot of things. We're going to have landslides to clear. We're going to have roads to fix. We're going to have debris to remove. First priority is get water to those locations. Then we can do the other functions. And then the other part is to restore water service to most of the city, as best that we can, within 3 months. And without being able to do that, there's really not a reason for folks to come back. Because you will have no water. Whatever water you bring is all that you're going to have. And we probably won't have wastewater facilities either. So that's talking about our water deficiencies. Next is to deal with City Hall. There's 3 drivers for this project. First of all, this facility is in the tsunami zone, the basic tsunami zone. So if we have an event, this place will be inundated. It was never designed to build or to withstand any level of an earthquake. This building was first put in to handle lumber products, storage of lumber products, warehouse, that sort of thing. We have made a lot of modifications to it. One of the ones that's kind of telling is that right over here on this wall, oh, I hit the wrong button again, sorry. Wow, I hit a lot.
You went through that kind of fast.
Yeah. We're kind of getting to the reader's, yeah, anyway, but along this wall seems to be a frame wall. But we have all the electrical things that are on it. And there's a brace that goes from the ceiling to the wall. So it appears that the wall is holding up the ceiling. And in fact, it was explained to me, no, that's not the case. The ceiling is holding up that wall. And right about where Karen and Jason are sitting, there's a bulge in that wall right there. So we have a lot of structural issues like that that have occurred. There's a discussion about whether or not this building could be renovated. There's one thing, we did a study with Tolwana Architects, and they hired a bunch of contractors and engineers, and their conclusion was because of the age of the building, because of the way it was constructed, and what I'm saying by the way it's constructed, if you walk on the floor, especially if you walk down towards finance, there's a lot of undulations, and when we did a project to do a kitchen and the restrooms, what they found is that the soil underneath the floor, the poured floor, used soil and sawdust. And so as the sawdust decomposes, we're starting to get a little bit of movement. There's one office or one workstation in the corner over of the finance department, and it drops off enough that we actually had to build a false floor for the person to work there. And if we did do something to this building, you'd still be in a tsunami zone. But their conclusion was that it's just not worth renovating. It would be easier to build new. We developed a program that developed what the size the rooms needed to be, how many rooms we needed, each office, that sort of thing, what kind of features we want to have in a council chamber, and that results in the size of a building, and the size of the building results in a budget. And so the city council put together a vetting committee to review that program, is what the document is called. So they put together the program, and the vetting committee reviewed it and voted unanimously that the current facility needs to be replaced. So it's been looked at by somebody besides staff and besides council. And the committee is actually having ongoing discussions. They're talking about alternatives, and they will be bringing those to council. Some is not to build the whole city hall at one time, maybe to build a police station, and then an emergency operations center with it, and then build the rest of the city hall later, something like that. So there are opportunities that are being investigated. When I'm talking about the hard decisions, I think it's pretty easy to say, okay, these are issues, and I think a lot of people would agree that yes, they need to be addressed, but then you got to pay for them. So in the utility rates, I kind of referenced that there was a utility master plan that was done. It was completed in 2018. The calculations that were done were in 2015, $16. It was $23 million, and it was to be done over 20 years. The split was water $17 million and wastewater $6 million. The total cost since that time has increased $1.8 million, and a lot of the projects were only going to be $1.8 million, but all of the costs have increased, and so now the $23 million project set is now $25.1 million. And that's just to point out what happens, with the delay of time. It's not without cost to go ahead and delay, so that puts a little more pressure on. To deal with utilities, and because of the cost that it might come out to be to do work on the water supply resiliency, the budget is in two parts. The first is operations. I did it again. First is operations, and that's pretty much all the costs except for capital projects. And so it would be paying for salaries, for contractors, for materials, for projects, that kind of thing. And then the capital side. And want to show a little bit of history. This goes back 8 years. And if you look in 2011, 2012, this was the budget. I'm more interested in what was spent. But so they spent less than what the budget was. But there were no capital projects done. And by capital projects, I'm talking about things in the ground, improvements to the system, replacements. There were acquisitions of a loader, dump trucks, equipment, but not necessarily doing any repairs in the ground. And then the next year, same thing. They underspent the budget, but there were no projects that would improve the system. Next year, same thing. Underspent the budget, but if you look, there's nothing there. It wasn't until 2014-15 that we found, there was a dump truck, but also finally a water line replacement. And then 16-17, there was a lot of work. That was around the time they were working on the master plan. and the master plan was done, and then a lot of other equipment that were included in there. I have to do a shout out to the Public Works Committee because they were driving these decisions, and as they got more involved with this in 17, 18, we did budget some things. You can see $225,000. It all wasn't spent. That's because one of the projects that we tried to do, the slow sand filters, we didn't time it well, and the person you get the sand from, if you're from this part of the coast, was already busy, so we just said we'll bid it again, let them know we're coming, and we came in again under budget with that one, but it didn't get done till 18-19. But you can see what happened in 18-19. There was a big increase from a capital standpoint, and then also the amount that was spent. We did the slow sand filter, which was budgeted the previous year. We did Ash Street water line replacement, the S-curves. The S-curves, a while back, there was a landslide through the S-curves, and when that occurred, a water line was knocked out. And we have two lines that run water, are able to run water to the south, and so when that one got knocked out, we only had one line, so there was no redundancy, within the system. So they finally were able to go ahead and do that, and if you're going through the S-curves, you can see where the new road work has been done. There's been some patches. That's where we put in the new water line. Sunset pressure tanks, got to say thanks to Public Works on that. It was budgeted in the master plan at about $300,000. Karen and folks beat up a bunch of engineers saying, you can do better, and we ended up solving it for like $15,000. So they did a great job with that. And then, so what occurred, you can see there was an increase in the budget, and then that also resulted in some other work that we did that was more on the operational side. We started doing things like exercising the valves. We found valves that didn't work. And one of the things that we want to do is to have enough valves in place so that if a small area is impacted, we don't have to shut off the water to the system or to a big area. We want to be able to go ahead and confine that. And we found that some of the valves weren't working. And when we would replace valves, we said, okay, we're going to replace that valve. But when we went to shut the water off, we found there were other problems. And so we got into replacing valves on a regular basis. We also, from a fire hydrant standpoint, your fire and your insurance is based on your access to how close you are to a fire hydrant. And there's an awful lot of parts of the city that the water that they're going to use to fight a fire at a house came on that truck because the hydrants aren't there. So we're trying to working with the fire district to try to install more of those. But in this time frame, in addition to the capital side going up, there was also, an increase in the operating expenses that allowed us to do things like replace valves and some other things like that. So you see that up in this time, the rates were held pretty low, and then around up in here we started getting more involved with projects, and then here also. But there was also an increase on the operating side, and the increase on the operating side supports those kind of projects. So pull this together later. Now, that's on the operational costs. The utility capital projects, you have pay-as-you-go, and pay-as-you-go is pretty much what we've been doing. You would set rates to go ahead, like if you had a $500,000 project, maybe over 1 or 2 years, you'd raise rates, set that money aside. When you were able to pay for it, you do the project. Again, that's how it was explained. When adequate funds are there, you can go ahead and proceed. Another thing is to be able to go through a loan, and that's where the funds are borrowed and paid off incrementally over the life of the project. So if we were going to do, say there's a part of the water supply system that's $3 million, we would be able to get the $3 million, do the whole project, and then the people that are here, because it would be funded over 30 years, if you're here for the next 5 years, you would pay only for the 5 years of the 30, whatever the increment is for each year for the payments. One of the things that I like about that is it doesn't mean we'll go ahead and collect $3 million for that, you all pay for it, and then everybody after you gets it for free. So that's one of the things about being able to go with the loans. Downside is it requires a debt service line item to be included. And so you're not collecting like the whole 3 million, but you are collecting enough to go ahead and pay back the people that loaned you the money. And so that's an ongoing cost for 30, say 30 years for each project. On doing the pay-as-you-go, if we were to say, all right, we want to do a project for $2 million. To do a project, let me just make it easier, for one project, it's $1 million project. We would have to raise rates 80% to recover those funds in that year. So, and then if you're going to do multiple projects, or it's going to be 3 million or something like that, you can see that the increase would be pretty high. But there is a way to do that. And if you once you raise it once, and the rates are already there, you're going to accumulate $1 million each time, although you do need to increase it by a little bit to make sure that you're staying at $1 million because of the inflation. The way that you would pay for it is to either increase rates or repurpose some of the revenues to make improvements as funds are available. And that's what we've done in the past, but they've been small things. If you're doing a loan, loans would be paid by residents as they are being used. As I said, somebody that's out 27 years, they'll pay for their 3 years for it, but you won't pay for the whole thing. And we have, depending on the loan, we might get something from 20 years to 40 years, depending on the project. Right now, interest rates are at historically low levels. I'll give you an example in a minute. And the debt service would be paid by increasing or repurposing the tax or rate revenue. Annual debt service is estimated to be $54,000 per million. And so if we use $1 million the first year, it'll tack on $54,000. If we use another $1 million the next year, it goes to $108,000. So that is cumulative as we go. And for each million, or to generate the $54,000, it would require a 4.5% increase in rates. And that's where we start talking about the rate model. These are some of the things that we've been able to find that are extremely beneficial to the city. We borrowed some funds to do the water meter replacement. And, I'm sorry, those buttons are too close together, I think. $624,000 is what we borrowed. Working with Business Oregon, they have a principal forgiveness part of their loans. We borrowed $624,000. They forgave $322,000. So that means the city, to do a $624,000 project, will be paying back $302,000 at 1% for 20 years. So we want to go to these people a lot. We like them a lot. So, but it is possible, and there's a lot of people who are trying to work with us. We had what's called a one-stop, and we'll probably be having another one as we move forward. But a lot of people like Business Oregon and DEQ and other people that deal with funding these kind of projects, these folks will do water, but DEQ is the one that would do wastewater projects, but they also have a 1% loan to do it. So we can get much better than market rates, but we still have to pay the principal, except in this case we get a break. But again, these are the people we would be going to for any projects. The project, that covers the, what we have, excuse me, for the water utility. City Hall, it depends on the location and the configuration. Sometimes it's a 2-story, sometimes it's a 1. We've looked at 3 different locations. So it's $15 to $17 million depending on the location. There's one other location that is probably the best in terms of being out of the tsunami zone, but it's not hard to build, or I'm sorry, it is hard to build at Southwind, and so that cost is significantly higher. But we may look at some, some partial projects instead of the whole thing in that location. But that gets us, from the tsunami standpoint, is the best location. So it's $15 to $17 million unless we go up there. The cost and configurations, I've already said the vetting committee is looking at other alternatives as opposed to just the one building. And again, the cost of waiting, we put off the project for a year while we were doing work on it. We had initial estimates, but the costs were estimated to increase by $750,000 between if we're going from a May 2018 to a May 2019 election. So there's pressure from that standpoint. Debt service for a home with an assessed value of $500,000 or $500,000. We originally looked and it was supposed to be 7.5 cents per thousand in assessed value. When talking about rates being historically low, we asked them to look again about a year later, and it went from 7.5 cents to about 4 cents. And so if it was 7.5, I'm sorry, so it would be $375 for a $500,000 assessed value house. And the reason I think that these numbers are important is that if we say we're going to build a $17 million, $15 million city hall, I'm not asking anybody here individually to write a check for that amount. It's going to be based on the value of your home, and these are what the assessments would be, and it kind of works in a straight line. But with the rates currently down to where they are, then it'd be $200 for a $500,000 house, and that's what you would pay annually. So I talked a little bit the last time. As far as when we talk about the rate model, we mentioned that there, back in like 1819, that you could see that there was a lot of work that work jumped up at that point. That's down in here. And so trying to develop a model for a council to be able to go ahead and have some rate predictability, we need to say, okay, what level are we going to be operating at for all these kind of costs? And so when we looked at it and we said, okay, just for starters, we can look at this year for what it costs us in operational costs, knowing that we would be able to do capital projects, but they would have to be separately funded. This would require to, every year, we would have to increase by 4.5% those costs. So you have, in the model, you have this ongoing increase for operational costs, for paying contractors, employees, supplies, all that. We estimate at 4.5%. Then when you look at the, excuse me, the capital side, and if you look at it in terms of the pay-as-you-go, it may require an 80%, but if you do it with loans, we're talking about 4.5% to be able to cover, $1 million. So, but the message there is that you've got this ongoing, to hold that same level of effort, 4.5 increase going forward, and then for every million, it's another 4.5%. And so once you do the first year and you get that million, you've added $54,000. Do another million, it's $54,000. And so those accumulate. And depending on how much we spend in a particular year, you're looking at 9% or more. But if you look back on that chart, we kept the rates lower, and we can go back to those rates again, but we just won't have the same level of effort as far as the projects that we're doing, and we certainly wouldn't be able to do anything like dealing with the water supply resiliency. So that to me is like some of the big challenges that council staff's going to have to be facing. Cannon Beach Elementary, I have on here just kind of as information. I don't know if it's going to be an issue or not, but I just want to make sure that people understand as we move forward. We're negotiating now. We've agreed to a purchase price of $400,000. The tentative uses are for event center, park, Indian Village restoration, other things. We don't know what it's going to be. As far as cost of development, we don't know until we know what it's going to be. So those are unknown too. We do have what we think is a pretty good funding source that doesn't come directly from taxes. And that is the transient room tax or the bed tax. There's a certain amount every time somebody comes and stays in the town, there's funds that are collected. And our success is tied to their success because the funds raised through the bed tax covers about 70% of our general fund. So the things that we have here, over half of them are paid by people that are staying in the room. So, but there is some funds that don't come directly from here. When the county approved the jail, they wanted to use bed tax because right now, the way that it's set up, the formula is that if you put in 1%, 30% of that you can use for whatever projects you want to work on. 70% has to be for tourism-related expenses. They said, we don't really need that 70% because we don't have that. And so they agreed that we will send that back to the cities where it was generated. And so that number for us comes out to about $420,000 a year. So what our plan is to use those funds, because when you look at the uses, a park, Indian Village restoration, that kind of goes along with ecotourism. An event center, that's a situation that hotels could potentially rent the space and have conferences or whatever if they don't have the space on their own property. So those are the kind of things that are eligible under it. So right now, in the early phases, we think we're able to use the bed tax pretty safely. And the only caution that I've got is if those funds are determined to be ineligible for some or all aspects, then the funding source that we've been thinking about using is not available, then it goes to the general fund again. So we just want to monitor that. We're working with our attorney. Each expenditure that we do, we'll vet to make sure that it meets the criteria. But that's just there, so it's like if the things change, then if we want to continue, we're going to have to, it's going to involve taxes. So that's all I've got for this presentation. I don't know if we want to turn on the lights or where you want to go next, sir.
Turn on the lights, please.
Okay.
Okay, at this point, we're going to open it up for comments from anybody who wishes to make a comment, questions, if you have questions. We're looking for some input that'll help us head towards decisions. Not that we're trying to make a decision on these right away, but just getting some input would be really nice. Mike? I was going to time these, but I'm not because it doesn't look like there's a whole lot of people out there, and I'd rather have everybody speak their mind.
Thank you. Mike Morgan, P.O. Box 132. I'm the chair of the vetting committee for the City Hall, and appreciate all the work that Bruce and the architects have done for that project. I think there was a lot of caution on the part of the committee about a couple of things, and that led us to the concept, which hasn't been voted on officially, of separating the projects and building a PD EOC Emergency Operations Center elsewhere. And one of the sites that's been mentioned is Southwind, a smaller portion of Southwind that was anticipated for the $28 million whole enchilada. So I think that needs to be explored. I think several of us think it needs to be explored. I think there's some opportunity there. You don't need to have the left turn refuge, all the ODOT requirements, presumably, because it's just the PD, several cars a day. And there is an opportunity to get our feet in the door in terms of infrastructure there with water and sewer and maybe some on-site facilities like a septic system and natural water that flows down onto the Southwind site. So it could be sort of the initial phase of development of the Southwind site that you wouldn't have elsewhere, like the RV park. I think there was general consensus that this site where we are is not really viable for a rebuild of the City Hall. So I think that's what we know at this point. That's what we've concluded. I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn. Jim's here. I don't know if any other members of the committee are here. Carolyn. And so we're going to hopefully keep meeting and discussing this. So I think it was a useful exercise, and I appreciate it. I think there was a lot of concern, and this is maybe a personal point of view. There's a lot of concern about ballot measure fatigue in terms of going out for another bond measure after the school and the jail. My taxes have gone up 30% in the last 4 or 5 years, and I think everybody's a little wary of that. So I think by doing a smaller facility that lends itself towards emergency preparedness is the way to go. So, and a personal point of view on the school acquisition, I'm really pleased to hear that, you know, we can use the county bed tax to move forward. I think that I don't think there's any question that that's going to be an ongoing source of revenue that can be used for purchase, renovation, and operation in the long run. So I think that's a great use of those county funds.
Anybody else?
I really just have a couple of questions on clarity. You know, and Bruce, you know I'm hesitant to criticize you, but
I don't recall that.
you got in here for every $1 million, there's an 80% increase in rates.
No.
Now, that's what it says.
For $1 million.
Pay as you go.
Right, for $1
Okay.
million.
Okay, let me finish.
Yes, it does.
Let's say your water bill's $1,000 a year, and you spend $1 million. Do the next year your water bill is going to be $1,800?
If we generate $1 million out of rates, yes.
Yes, okay, so, and then the next year, I mean, you got 15, 16, $18 million you need. So in the next year, it goes up another $800?
No, if you hold at that same level, each year will generate $1 million. But
I
if you do it one time, and then say, okay, we're not going to do it again, you don't get another $1 million until you do another 80%.
I see. How much would it cost to get say, half of this bonded? How much would that raise the rate?
Right now, the trouble I have, until we look at what the costs are going to be for the water resiliency, I really don't.
You don't know that yet?
I don't know what half of it is.
You don't have that yet?
No.
Okay,
We've got
all right.
a consultant working on that.
Well, at 1% interest, it seems to me that it would not be a bad idea to swing the bat a little bit and prioritize this stuff.
Yes.
If there was $5 million worth of stuff you needed at 1%, that looks like a pretty good deal.
Yeah, and I'm semi-confident that we've reached the threshold that they consider us to be eligible for
Okay.
that buy-down. And so I'm hoping when we get into the bigger numbers, we'll see, you know, significant.
What are you hearing for rates now? If you just borrowed, say, $5 million?
Let me see, for the rates, they went down to 1.9 for 15 years and 2.1 for 30, was the last discussion we had with our financial advisor.
Okay.
And that's going to the bond market.
Okay. Have you talked to Farm Home or anybody like that?
Pardon?
Have you talked to Farm Home or anybody like that? There's a lot of sources for that kind of money.
I understand, and these folks have access to all those.
Yeah, okay, all right. Okay, well, I just think there needs to be a comparison to get your priority projects if we can borrow money really, really cheap. I mean, Mike, you've been involved in development projects. We've never seen 1% and 2% money before. If you can get 2% money and you've got a priority list that helps armor the water system, it seems to me that that's a good direction to go.
Yes. Yeah. And, yes. I agree.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Can I say one more thing? I want to give a shout out to Public Works and Energizer Bunny, the Public Works Director. I am embarrassed to say that during my tenure as mayor, we didn't do any major, if their information is correct, and I hope it is, we didn't do any major capital improvement projects during when I was in mayor, when Sam and I were on the council. And I think that is really to the credit of Public Works that they've addressed that problem and are moving forward with it. I don't know why we didn't. I have to blame it on Rich Mays, but I think, I think it's great that you're doing it now. So,
And if I could, can I address something on that?
Sure.
I use myself as an example. Once I hit 50 or 60, my maintenance costs went up. That there's a time frame where you don't have to spend much on your system. So I think that it was someplace in there it was recognized, the 15, 16 where we started the master plan and Public Works Committee was working on that. That I think was around the time that you reached the tipping point to do it. And my only point on that was not to say they didn't do anything back here. It was that there was a change in the effort or the productivity once we made an adjustment and properly budgeted for it. I don't know that there was any requirement for projects at that point, but there was a recognition, let's do a master plan because we're going to have to do some work. So
well, I think there could have been some, everybody knew that water line was fragile coming down from the springs. We could have been doing it, for the last 10 or 20 years, for that matter. But not to blame, Rich Mays, although I will. But I think it's great that it's happening, and I think it needs to be done. So, thank you.
thanks, Mike.
Actually, my recollection of that was a lot like the traffic management plan. We were always waiting for it to happen.
Yeah.
So when we were heading towards the Public Works master plan, there was a lot of wait and see. So,
And if you look, right after we got the master plan done, that's when we had the big increment or the big increase, because now we had the list to work from. And we were able to identify or address some of the things that needed to be done immediately.
okay, I'm looking for more input. Anybody else? Sure.
P.O. Box 603. I'm here to fill Ed Johnson's big shoes because he was unable to be here tonight. And it's too bad that Mike left because I was going to say, good job, Mike. If you didn't spend any money while you were mayor, that's great. Anyway, I have a kind of an open letter that I was going to read. Some of our projects, sometimes I wonder, like the water project to bring water down to a town after the big tsunami. The town won't be here after the big tsunami. There won't be any houses to bring water to or businesses or anything else. If anything, we just need some big water jugs up at the top of the hill. That's the people that are going to need the water, the few that make it up there. In any case, some of our projects, I feel sorry for all you guys to look at the numbers that you have to look at, and I would go home and throw up after trying to figure out how to pay for all these things, Anyway, basically, this is a letter to the city councilors, sirs and madams. The city of Buchanan Beach has been trying to rebuild the city hall for a long time. The reason for the rebuild was a leaky roof and bad electric service, and the main reason has always been to get it out of the tsunami zone. At that time, they wanted to put it on stilts. Anybody could have told them that that wouldn't work, but they proceeded to spend $61,000 on a study. They should have fixed the electric and the leaky roof problems. I guess it wasn't so bad because here we are years and years later trying to fix the same problems. First, I wanted to ask what is so important about moving City Hall out of the tsunami zone? How many people are usually in the building? Why are they so important? Isn't the police department, when it's closer to downtown, more important to be here? Not only in a tsunami, but mass shootings downtown, somebody running down pedestrians in their car. Any problems that happen are going to be downtown. Getting by a Pelican Pub is not an easy proposition in the summer. Historically, there are three types of tsunamis here. One comes from Japan, one comes from Alaska, and the other one is the big one. The first two, I could personally give everyone a ride up the hill because they don't come for 36 to 48 hours. The police could move all their equipment out of the way easily. With the big one, no one gets out alive unless they run naked up to the nearest hill. Moving City Hall to the campgrounds would not even be close. Personally, I'm involved in this issue because I live by the campgrounds. Moving City Hall there would change the nature of my neighborhood drastically. But besides my personal issue, I feel that the project is so overblown as to cripple this town for a long time. We are a community of 1,730 people. We already providing an infrastructure for over 30,000 people or more that come every day in the summer. We are already paying bond measures for a $170 million school and a new jail. We don't need any more bond measures. As far as solutions, there are many. Personally, I believe City Hall would be best situated in its current location. It's not only cheaper and faces the least resistance, but it is also the best location for dealing with problems. If the police department needs more room, then they could easily store equipment at the Southwind location, leaving their headquarters downtown. Finally, I would like to address the pressure that city officials are putting on you as city councilors to make decisions on this issue. They would lead you to believe that you have a timetable to make your decisions. Their timetable is based on when they feel it would be best to put the bond on an election to a vote. They even threaten to raise the bid by $500,000 if you don't do what they want now. They plainly have their own agenda instead of working for you, the city councilors, or the people that elected you. I would like to see a modest city hall that reflects the values of our small community, not a monument to the power of City Hall. I noticed that you councilors have been invited to a class with the city attorney on rules of government, quotes. Maybe you should give them a class on who's governing who. You are the boss, not them. And I wanted to pass these out if I could, just to get them put in the frames, for
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. And tell Ed thanks. Anybody else? Great.
Greg Swedenborg, 188 West 2nd Street. So as we look at the report that Bruce presented Monday and tonight, I think like most citizens, residents, business owners in town, nobody really wants to pay higher rates or a new general obligation bond on your property tax. But there's things we need to do, and I'm not going to argue that point. I tend to believe more on a personal level, more in investing in Southwind and a big place to retreat to and have a command center than $20 million or $17 million building here. From the water system, we not a water guy, but if it needs to be fixed, it needs to be fixed, and we need to invest in that system. And the school, I think it's a wonderful use of the lodging tax dollars, and I think while I didn't like the county doing that, we have a lot of the 1.2 million in the three increases flowing through this town that could be used in better ways, and I think the school is a better way to use them. But I am kind of disappointed in that there were no other ideas or thoughts on how we could raise this money and take the burden off the 1,800 citizens of town, or more if you count second homeowners and stuff that would be paying it in the property tax. And I'm going to sound like a squeaky broken record here because I talk about this a lot to a lot of people. But one of the ways that we can do this is by doing what Ashland did in 1993 and Yachats did in 2007. So in a little history lesson, if you're not familiar with that, in 1993, Ashland had about a $35 million wastewater system plant that they had to rebuild. They borrowed $24 million coincidentally to get started on that and to do that. And the city instituted a prepared food and beverage tax of 5%. So not groceries, not alcohol, basically things you get at a restaurant, anything that's prepared. That went into place in 1993, it sunsetted in 2010. But in 2009, they went back and the citizens voted it to extend it to 2030. So it's still in place. Last year, it collected $3.5 million based on about the 100 restaurants they have in town. Ashland gets, according to their Chamber of Commerce site, about 380,000 visitors a year. We get 2.5 times that per year here. Prepared food and beverage tax, well, when I go to the Driftwood, I wouldn't like to pay it on my chowder and fish and chips, but it's going to be 50 cents on the bill, and I would have to eat out $10,000 a year to bring up 500 bucks. But the 750 some odd thousand people that come through here and buy pizza by the slice, get lattes, eat out at the restaurants from all over the world now. I mean, we're an international destination now because of our assets right behind us on the beach. Those 750,000 people buying the food, doing that, are chipping in on our new city hall, our new water system, and whatever. It's something that in Hood River in May of 2019, so 7 months ago or whatever, failed 59 to 41%. But theirs was to do a food and beverage tax to build stuff for tourists. We don't need that. We already have that money. We have more money than we know what to do with that. They wanted to tax the citizens of Hood River County, not just the city, which doesn't have nearly the amount of hotels as we do in our little town. And they wanted to tax everybody's prepared food and beverage for that so they could build trails, build things for tourism, to boost tourism. I come from the standpoint of we get a boatload of people coming through here, driving on 101, doing whatever, day trippers, everyone calls them. Because we're a state with no sales tax, they don't pay a dime. They do, the people that stay overnight do, they pay handedly, and that's why 70% of our budget is made on that. But the people just driving through, the people from Portland for the day trippers, don't pay a dime, but they use our infrastructure, our services, flush the toilets, use the water system, blah, blah, blah. And we, for some reason, don't do anything about it. So I would propose to look at another solution on how to do this, one being the food and beverage tax. Yachats and Ashland have successfully done that. Hood River 9 months ago, unfortunately didn't get it passed. You can do it, as far as I know. We have cities that have done that. And furthermore, if you look at the 5 states that don't have sales tax, which are Alaska, Montana, Delaware, New Hampshire, and Oregon. Montana does have a sales tax for cities under 5,500 people. So Whitefish, West Yellowstone, Big Sky, they have a sales tax on food and beverage and stuff. When I buy ski goggles in Big Sky, I pay 3% tax on my ski goggles, and anything else. Food and beverage is just, is also taxed there. Another big one is New Hampshire. New Hampshire does not have a sales tax, but it has a statewide 9% prepared food and beverage tax. So when you buy a latte in New Hampshire, even though it has no sales tax, you're paying 9% on your latte. I think it can be done. I think, personally, not scientifically, I think we could probably generate $2 million a year based on the restaurants in this town for prepared food and beverage. And it's just another way to get revenue without it being a burden on the 1,800 people in this town that are already have bond fatigue and rate fatigue and all of that. So I would just like to hope that the council would kind of maybe push back to staff and say, hey, look into that. Or maybe people aren't interested in it. I don't know. But the people that I talk to that understand that the water rate in Ashland right now for a typical residence is $24 a month, whereas in Bend it's $45, and after our rate adjustment and rate increase and 80% for $1 million, I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be higher than that. And they get the visitors to pay for it, and I think we should too. That's it. Thank you.
Just to add a little bit to that, we have looked at food and beverage tax recently for another reason. Not that I want to get into the whys and wherefores of that, but Recently, as far as I understand, recently the legislature has kind of put the kibosh on that, the last legislature. Still, I've asked our legal attorney, Ashley, to see if she can find out a little more detail about when that goes into place and how that happens. But,
So that would have changed between May and now.
yeah,
And that could be, but you could still do a gross tax.
yeah. And there's other things,
Ways to do it.
yeah. And I would gladly look into other ways. Bruce?
And, Greg, the date was April 19th, was if you had a sales tax, or not a sales tax, but a food and beverage tax in place at that time, you could continue it, but you couldn't add one after that. And then you used the word gross receipt. In that same legislation, there is, it says that you can't tax gross receipts. So what we end up with is that if you have a bar, we already can't do liquor, but we could do their food and beverage. But if you don't sell liquor, and we're doing the food and beverage that you do, we would not be able to tax that business, based on our analysis now, because then we would be doing it on gross receipts. If we're doing it on a business that has, they're separating out the alcohol, then we're not taxing their gross receipts, they're doing a portion. So two things happened when this thing passed, and I, had talked to you about this, and you talked about it quite a bit, so we did look into it. But, and then we found, because we were actually, trying to go ahead and do projections and things like that, but that it got cut off, our ability to do it got cut off as of the April 19th date. That's why those other places can still do it.
Well, I know they're grandfathered in.
Yeah.
But I'll have to look into that, but, Prop 103, I think it was the one that was to freeze that ability, and it failed.
Mhm.
So whatever legislation that Oregon voters didn't vote on, that has changed, but there's still other ways you can tax or collect revenues from daily visitors.
Mhm.
And we could do it in such a mass that we wouldn't have to go to bonus.
Yeah, and I think, and that was kind of the thought with the food and beverage taxes, that would generate a lot of funds. But as of right now, we think we're kind of blocked out for doing it.
Do what Montana does and make it a destination tax.
Yeah.
But anyway.
No, we're welcome to new ideas.
Yeah.
We'll look into them as best we can. So, yeah, thanks. Anybody else? There's Jim again.
One other question, and I'm still at 332 North Spruce. And I'm okay with that tax as long as you don't tax booze. The First Street Bridge are you looking at doing anything out there so at least survives an earthquake?
There's no special project on it now. They did do some work
Yeah, I know.
recently, but what would happen is that there's pieces that go underneath it and support it. Those would stay in place, the deck would move. They think that the beams would still be in place. You could walk across, whatever. It's not going to be a comfortable situation. But no, there's not a rebuilding or anything like that contemplated for that bridge.
Was there ever a cost put on that so it would at least hold up until the tsunami came? The reason I ask that question is the Christian Conference Center has gotten a lot busier with their new food facility. And it's pretty busy now. I live right next to it. And there's a lot of people there. They're going to have a hell of a time making it down the street, up a hill, and out to the highway or whatever other side is safe. Not to mention old guys that live on the ocean front that limp. So it seems like that bridge could be modified to at least withstand the earthquake.
Jim, there was a study done, probably, let's see, probably around 2010 or so, and I think at that time, there were a couple of different options for replacing that bridge, and I think at that time, I want to say $3 million.
But with that, just the tsunami or just the earthquake or the earthquake and the tsunami?
It was earthquake and tsunami. It was
Both.
supposed to withstand an earthquake, and you could get past there, I think, in 15 minutes, and then the tsunami would probably
Well,
take it.
if the old school site, if the city buys that, and turns that into something that generates a lot of people on that site on a regular basis, that's a whole bunch more people that are really high risk right there. And I live there, I understand the risk, but it seems like that would be a pretty easy way to save a lot of people's lives. And you get across the bridge and you're going straight up in the air, so you get out of the tsunami. But I think in the big picture of things, Bruce, that needs to be taken a look at.
Well, there's a lot of things we need to do.
Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, can I address a couple of things that were said? Is that
Sure.
acceptable? Phil, to your points, we pretty much decided that we weren't going to be able to do anything about a 9.0, but in our discussions with the Ghana, they said that there's going to be a lot of other events that are more likely to occur, like there's July 19th, there was a magnitude 4.5 off of Bandon, about 150 miles east out into the Pacific. And the rumbling was felt 150 miles inland in Eugene. And so there are local events that can happen that would, cause an earthquake that potentially would impact this building. But none of us think that we'll be able to outrun a 9.0. So what we're looking at is something that is smaller. We had a tsunami in '64. It hit us here. It came from Alaska, as you said. I don't know what the time frames were. I didn't think they were as long as what you've mentioned, but anyway, but it is possible that we can get hit with other things, and that's really where the concern is. And it's not the people in the building. It's that this building is where the people that are going to take care of everybody work. And so if this building is gone, we've got nothing. And so that's why we're trying to make sure we have at least an emergency operations center, something like that, so that we can, manage all of the things that are going to need to happen. And we will be on our own, and so we want to do the best that we can. So the idea of having a city hall out of it was always contemplated with the police station, but to have the city hall out of the tsunami zone was to be able to continue operations. So the area over at the RV park actually is out of even the extra large tsunami. So you're in pretty good shape where you live. But it's above the extra large tsunami. The one that it is not out of is the XXL, and that's the one that you need to go up to south wind to get away from. So most events at the RV park we would be above, and if it was built to withstand earthquakes, we would have that operations center to be able to go on with it. So I'm not trying to counter you, but we did look at some of those things, and we aren't going to be able to build tonight. That's for sure.
Okay, then, I guess, Mark?
Mark Bates, P.O. Box 1423, Haystack Heights resident. Just a question, again, we've been talking about Southwind ever since we acquired it and ran into big problems there. My question is, has anybody raised the idea, we got that from the timber company? The timber company owns land off of Warren Way Extension. Could we not trade that site for a site that has no highway access issues and might even be more stable than Southwind? Just an idea. Again, wouldn't require highway modification. Again, there's water and sewer already under the highway at Warren Way. Those kinds of issues go away, and, we did business with the timber company once. Why not do it again? Maybe it's even stable. I don't know. Just a thought. Water project, again, water supply is important. I was happy to see that we're focusing on not the whole distribution system, because I don't think we can build one that withstands it. And that's, I guess, my one question there. If we put all this money in, will it work afterwards? But I think we have to do it. Whether it happens or not, we need that water. So, again, just a couple thoughts.
Thanks, Mark.
And also, to that point, that most of the events that are going to occur are not going to be 9.0s. And so there might be parts of the city that are damaged, But, and again, part of the deal with the valves, suppose the waterfront was damaged. Hurricane experience says that even if you have a water system that's working, all the water's going to be shooting out of the ground where the houses used to be. We want to be able to isolate sections to be able to go ahead and continue to supply water to everybody. So that's all part of the projects that we're doing now and will be doing. But we do hope that some of the city would still be here. We had that with the 64, but we need to, the system was 50 years younger then, too. Okay, thanks.
Okay, last call. Thanks, everybody, for coming and trying to give us some insight. And we'll probably have more later on all of this. So I will ask the council if there's anything for good of the order.
We have a coffee with the counselors at 10 o'clock on Monday morning, so come talk to us about whatever you'd like to talk about, 10 o'clock.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.